Hello and welcome, everybody. Happy Friday. It's great to have you all joining us here on our Crowdcast channel. Hi, Justin. It's so good to see you.
Hey, Maria.
We've been talking before we got started, but I can't resist a wave. So, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Maria Marquis, and here at Coda, I focus on customer outreach, education, and just like celebrating all of the people that are building Coda docs inside of Coda. That is my main job. I'm cheerleader in chief. That's my job. CCO, Chief Cheerleading Officer. That works for me. I'm also, lucky for all of you, joined by my fabulous colleague, Justin. Justin, do you want to introduce yourself to the folks here who may not know who you are?
Yeah, hey folks. So glad to be here and glad you're able to join us. I am on the solutions team, so I help build interesting docs, and I actually especially nerd out with formulas. So very
Mhm.
excited to join today and to get into the nitty gritty with some really fun formulas.
Yeah, excellent. So, like Justin said, today is our first episode of Formula Fitness. Stretch out, get yourself ready. You don't want to hurt yourself as we go through our Formula Fitness. And what we wanted to do is we actually did one of these sessions internally. So Justin led this Formula Fitness session for all of our codins. What was it, about like 2 weeks ago, Justin? Something like that?
Yeah,
And we thought, oh my gosh, why not just share this with our Coda community? Because a lot of times people are asking us, how do I get better at formulas? So, Justin, do you want to just talk a little bit about kind of where the idea for Formula Fitness came from before we jump in and start taking a look?
totally. Yeah. So I had, everybody, including people internally at Coda, everybody works on formulas over time. It's a process of
Mhm.
learning how to use them. So there's always room for improvement. And I noticed a lot of my colleagues coming to me asking for help on formulas. And I started to see trends on which ones they were
Mm.
asking for and kind of which ones I could maybe help the most with. So I decided
Yeah.
to put together a little event internally and we called it Formula Fitness. And uh, folks really loved it. So we're hoping that you also can enjoy the time together today.
Yeah. And also, just so everybody knows, one of the things that we're working on here is a whole new video series all about formulas called Formula Essentials. And a lot of what we're going to be doing in today's session is going to play into that because we want to really empower people with not only the kind of what the formula is, but also give you some exercises to really practice it in person. Because as Justin said, so much of what kind of getting really good at Coda is all about is starting to notice patterns and noticing, oh, whenever I'm looking for something like this, I can rely on this little formula phrase to help me out. So, what we wanted to do is we wanted to start with the filter formula. So, the filter formula, essentially, what it allows you to do is look at a part of your data set because we don't want to see everything all the time. Sometimes I just want to see, comments where Maria was mentioned as super cool or whatever it might be that you're looking for. So the filter formula lets you kind of parse your information to make it more usable based on the questions you want to answer. And I'll say, and I'd be interested to hear what you think, Justin, I think the filter formula is probably the one I use most frequently in my Coda docs. Do you find it's the same for you?
Yeah, in fact, I'll share a little secret. This is really like at least 50% of the formulas that I write in Coda. And the filter formula is one of the most powerful. I like to relate it to if there are any Excel junkies out there who love
Mm,
doing Excel and you do a lot of moving around data and searching in data in Excel,
mhm.
you use VLOOKUP quite a bit. And this is Coda's version of of the VLOOKUP, but it's simpler. And once you understand it, it's much more powerful. So this one is going to be a huge tool in your toolkit. Really excited
Mhm.
for the filter formula.
Ooh, great question. So, folks are saying need to request access to the link above. Let me actually just give you a new link. I was doing a little undiscovered publishing here. So, I'm actually going to share my screen so you can all see how I'm doing this. So, Paul, you should have it in just a moment. Justin, if you can just let me know when you can see my screen, that would be
Yeah.
super awesome and great. Beautiful. Okay, so I had done a little publish up here, up at the top. And play mode. I'm going to do it play mode. So let me know now, Paul, if you go and refresh that, let me know if that resolves the issue. Otherwise, I can just create a regular sharing link.
And Maria, if you scroll up, just make sure discoverable is on.
Oh, well, that explains why. There we go.
There we go. Yep.
All right, cool. So now everybody should have it. There is a button that you can click so that you can copy your own doc, and let me know if folks are still having issues as well. So, how this is structured is we want you to make a copy of this doc. Awesome, fabulous, Paul. So glad you've got what you need. Lovely, lovely. We want you to make a copy of this doc so that you can really use it as your own formula playground. And what Justin has done, because he's a freaking genius, is he's created a whole little workout routine over here on the left side of the page with exercises that kind of build in complexity for the filter formula. But before we start taking a look at these exercises, I think it's always really helpful to start by looking at the data. Because if you don't understand the data that you're trying to kind of look through and filter, it's going to be a lot more challenging to really think about how you want to approach using this formula. So here we go. We've got this handy little data area. You'll notice we have a couple different tables. We've got a type table. This clearly populates a lookup column elsewhere. We've got a categories table with different categories on our blog, a description about it, and then, hey, is this selected or not? We also have a whole table of blog posts with links to our blog post, who the author is, when it was published, the category, the description, the URL to the doc, and then the featured. And remember that type table we saw at the top? This is the column that is being populated by it. You'll notice it is a lookup column, and we're having it pulled directly from that particular table. So we've got a bunch of different data types that we're looking at here.
One
So
thing, Marie,
now, yeah,
I'll
go
just
ahead,
jump in
Justin.
while we're here.
Get in
One
it.
thing to look at, especially, is with these lookup columns, you want to make sure you understand whether they're multi-select or single select. The type column, if you could just pop open that setting again.
Yeah, let me get
This
there.
is a multiple select, so that will affect the formulas we use down the line. Just take note of that. And then let's look at the category column. And if we just pop open the settings there, this one is single select. And so just something to note, just put that in your back pocket for later when we're building some of these formulas.
Excellent. Awesome. Pro tip. And I just want to reinforce something that Justin has said is that if you're unsure like what you're dealing with, always pop open the formats, because sometimes you'll make a doc and then months will go by and you're like, wait, I made this doc? What? And never be afraid to kind of explore and poke around. It'll be a really helpful way to make sure that you're approaching it appropriately, and a good way to help troubleshoot yourself. So let's start with our filter workout routine. And we're going to go to the simple first exercise here, exercise number 1. Also, just one thing I want to sort of normalize with everybody here today. If you've got a question or a comment or an emotional outburst, you can always go ahead and post over there in our chat on the right side of your screen. You can also always click on the Ask a Question button right below Justin and my face. Either way works, but really we want to make sure as you're starting to explore that we can support you through this process. Also, we are recording today. It'll be available on our Crowdcast channel as well as our YouTube channel for everybody and everyone. So here we go.
Maria,
we got our first.
Sorry to interrupt again.
Justin,
Can I
interrupt
say
me
one more thing?
whenever you want. You can say more than one thing. I'm just blabbing. Go for it.
One thing to note here as well, guys, is these exercises get harder with each one. It's also the beginning ones are the most important to understand. So really make sure you understand exercises 1, 2, 3. They'll get harder as they go, but the basic fundamentals are really important here. So feel free to ping if you're having questions.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. So let's take a look at this first exercise. And I think this is probably one, Justin, that of the 50% of the formulas that you use, this is probably what, like 80% of the filter formula
80 of
work?
the 50. Yeah.
Exactly. So we could do some really intense math there. So what it's asking us is, how can we find the number of blog posts that have this particular category, in this case, launch? So here, if we think about that big blog post table, one of the columns was the category. And as Justin said, that's a single select list. So there's only one option that you can do. And we want to know how many of those blog posts have that category. So Justin, if you are looking at this particular formula, how do you recommend that folks think about this? Like, how do you recommend they kind of enter into that?
Yeah, really great rule of thumb is to think about the data and where it lives. In other words, the table, and start with that. And then use dots to then drill down and find the exact piece of data that you want from that data set. So when I start my formula, I would just think, what is the table that this is in? Let's start with that.
Mhm. Excellent. So let's go ahead and reveal the answer here. So I have the answer in this spot. Of course, you could always challenge yourself. And I'm going to right click on this formula just so we can see what's going on here. So, like Justin said, the power of this little dot is so much about kind of letting you narrow in on what you want. So, like Justin said, you always want to start with, like, wait, which table are we calculating from? Where do I want Coda to start looking? Then, once you choose that table, you can say dot and then filter. And here's where you say, this is the part of the table that I'm interested in this case, where the category is launch. And then that dot, I want to then count it. So I always coach people whenever I'm helping them with formulas is the dot is like saying, and then, or it's delineating the next step. So first look at blog posts and then look at the category where it is launch. And then I want you to count it. So, Justin, if you think about this particular formula model, which is one that, again, the 80% of the 50,
Mhm.
are there any areas where folks can get stumped? Like any potential pitfalls that you see with this particular formula setup?
Yeah, there's two that come to mind. The first one is
Hmm.
everything inside of the filter um, parentheses. So
Hmm.
that's what we call like the the category equals launch. That's like the
Hmm.
criteria for the filter. You can
Yeah.
actually add multiple criteria, which we'll do later. But a lot of
Hmm.
times, if you're having problems with the filter formula, you've written the criteria incorrectly or
Mm.
uh, in a way that like it doesn't make sense with the data set. So that's the
Yeah.
first place I would look.
Got it.
Um, Actually, something interesting to do here is if you just delete the dot count at the end, I just want to show
Oh,
folks
let's do
what
it.
this is doing. The
You've got the
second
power.
stumbling point is when you mix up a row reference with a text reference. So what we did here is we actually took off the dot count and we have a list of rows. So really a table is just a list of rows.
Hmm.
And what we've done here is this is just the rows that have that category from that table.
Right.
And then adding the dot count is counting rows. So something to remember is like this all the table really is a list of rows. And so then you can do things with that list.
Mhm. Awesome. Yeah, and I think it's also helpful to know, what we're dealing with here. It's just like a bag of parts, right? It's like a box of Legos, and I can pull them all out and then I can put them together in different ways depending on what I want to do. The other thing I always recommend folks kind of play with is maybe instead of saying how many of these blog posts have launch, maybe I want to have it be a bulleted list, or I want to average
Mhm.
it, or I want to do something else. You can change this little ending bit to change like what you want to do with that information. Like, great, you found how many of these have the launch category, but now what do you want to do? And I love this one, the bulleted list formula, because let's just go ahead and add it. I really do like text. And here it shows us that bunch of rows that table is, but it's giving us it in a bulleted list instead of a big old block of text. So it's just helpful to know that you can always change that little ending bit to decide what do you want to do with that information. All right, so I'm going to add count again because, of course, we want to have that nice and clean. Excellent. So now that's like, again, the most basic filter formula, just starting with one criteria. So let's move on to exercise 2 and see what's changing here. Also, just a reminder, everybody, if you have questions, you can always let us know just by posting to chat or that questions option. Either one works for us. So now, what Justin is asking us to do is use filter to return the first category listed in the categories table with the selected column unchecked. So, Justin, if you look at this exercise, how is this different from what we saw in exercise number 1? Where does this change?
Yeah. So the first thing that I think we should note here is it's a different table that we're referencing. So the first one we
Mhm.
referenced the blog post table. This one we're not even touching the blog post table. We're just looking at the categories table. In fact, it might be
Yeah.
worth going back over there to see it again.
Yeah, let's go and jump over and see it. All right, data. I'm going to start singing. Formulas make me sing. So here we are. We've got that categories table. And
Yep,
before we were down here in that blog post table. But as we know, this category is a lookup to this particular table up at the top.
that's right. So the tables are connected, but in this case, we're actually asking for categories table and that selected column there on the right, the checklist.
Mhm.
Um, another tip here is the way that formulas read checkboxes is true and false. So keep that in mind as you build the formula. Checked is
Yeah.
true and unchecked is false.
hmm And actually, I'm just going to show one thing over here. I'm going to click filter on this table, and I'm going to go ahead and add a filter on this. I'll remove it later, but checked. So notice here, if we have it in this kind of like more, I call this the flight selector interface. Like if you're going to go and try and book a plane, you can have things be checked or unchecked. But notice if I click on this little here, this little shish kebab menu, we can show the formula. So this is a great way to learn more about kind of what the formula behind all of these little user interface aspects are. This is a great way to teach yourself. Notice it's saying selected equals true. So this is what Justin is talking about. And I'm going to go ahead and just
And
remove that.
yeah,
Yeah, go
pro
ahead.
tip, by the way, the filter, when you use filter formulas here when you're filtering a view,
Mhm.
it's the exact same way you write filter formulas. It just removes the actual like filter and parentheses. So it's everything inside
Yeah.
that parentheses when you're doing it on a view of a table. So like just think in your mind if you're trying to filter a table, oh, this is the filter formula, but we don't have to put filter in parentheses. We can just put whatever's
Mhm.
inside.
Yeah, because in this case, the table is implied by just being in the tables menu. So this is that criteria aspect that Justin was talking about when we kicked off. Ooh, that's a great pro tip,
That's right.
Justin. I love that. I'm going to steal that. All right, so this is our data. So let's head back to that exercise number 2 and take a closer look at what this is. So in this case, we know we're going to be dealing with a true false situation, and we're looking at a different table. So let's go ahead, take a peek at the answer. The other thing that I think is interesting here is we're asking for the first category. So let's go ahead, right click on this formula and see what's going on here. So Justin, as we saw, this is that when we were filtering the table in the tables menu, this is that kind of inside the parentheses. So we're zooming out here. Do you want to talk about how we've treated this last bit of the clause here, Justin?
Yep. So just like we did in the first problem, adding that little bit at the end takes the list of rows and does something to it. In this case, instead of counting the number of rows, we're just taking the first item in the list. You could actually also do last here, dot
Yeah.
last, or dot nth, which is kind of a funny formula, but you put the number that you want in there. So you can choose any item from the list. Um, First, last, and nth are interesting ones to do.
Lucky number 3. What's your lucky number, Justin?
Oh, four actually.
4. Excellent. So culture would be your particular blog post. So again, like what we're seeing here, I want to just reiterate, it's essentially the same structure, right? We're still saying, look at this table, show me this part of the table, but all we're doing is we're changing then what we're doing with the information. So it's the same structure, beginning, middle, end. We're just adjusting what the end does to meet this new need that we have. And we're approaching this idea of a checklist is true, false. Anything else on this one, Justin, that you think is valuable for folks getting started to know about?
No, I think that's hopefully this is starting to make sense and we're starting to see
hmm
the pattern here. Um, Maybe folks can give us a thumbs up if they're following with this
Yeah.
and understanding.
Yeah, give us a thumbs up in chat if you're like feeling pretty good, and give us any other signal, maybe a sad face if you're like I can't handle it, I need help. Awesome, great. It
All
looks like
right, Danny,
folks are feeling
Julie.
pretty good about it. Beautiful. And I do just want to reiterate, like this is a pattern. It's beginning, middle, end, and how complicated the beginning, the middle, or the end is really up to you and up to the question you want to answer. So now let's move on to
That's right.
exercise number 3. I'm feeling like I'm getting my heart rate up a little bit here. So let's move into the high intensity part of our training. So now we have another exercise, which is use filter to find the author of the blog post whose category is launch and the post is featured. So here, if we're looking at this exercise, the grammar of the sentence actually gives us some signals of what we might need to do with our formula. Because again, a formula is just like a sentence itself, right? I'm telling you exactly what I'm looking for. So this is just like the text version of that formula. So we want to know the author. We want to know we're looking at the blog post table, and we know that we're interested in a category that is launch and also the post is featured. So if we head back to our data, let's take a look at what this looks like in data mode. So we know we're going to be in this blog post table. We know we want the category to be from this particular table. And we also know that we've got this featured column. And it's a checklist, so we also know that it's going to be true false thing. So the primary that we're seeing in exercise number 3 is we now have multiple criteria that we're dealing with. And these criteria are actually, if you're pretty, if you're ahead of the game here, it's a combination of the criteria we saw in exercise 2 and exercise 1. Justin, anything else on this particular formula that you think is helpful for folks to know about before we take a look at the structure?
No, I think this is a good blend of 1 and 2, and hopefully it helps to solidify those principles.
Yeah. All right. So let's take a look. I'm going to right click on that formula here. So let's see what we're looking at. So number 1, we can notice there's a lot of things happening. We've got more inside of the parentheses, but we still notice the same thing. The blog post table is where we want to start. We want to look at the category as launch, and featured is true. So this little and is so important because we can use it to combine criteria. We can also use or. So if I was interested in, if it's a launch article or if it was something we featured, then I want to see it. So and or there are really helpful. But notice what we're doing here at the end. We're not doing an action like count, first, last, nth. We're actually pulling another column in here. So Justin, do you want to talk a little bit about this dot author when we're pulling in more column information?
For sure. Yeah. So what we're doing is essentially taking a row, like I mentioned earlier, and instead of referencing that entire row, we want a certain value that's in the author column. So you can use dots also to like reduce the row down to just a column in that row. And it might be helpful if we jump back really quick again so you can see in the data, what that looks like.
For sure.
So just take a row, pretend like we ended up on one of these rows here in the blog post, and instead of returning the entire row from the formula, we say, no, I want to know the actual author, which is one of those columns. In this case, Al Chen.
Yeah. And I think it's helpful to know that, rows are like the smallest unit in Coda, right? Al Chen here doesn't exist without this doc title, this date published category, and all of that. The row is one thing, but just like we can filter a table, we can also filter the row by just saying, hey, just show me that author column. Everything else is going to come along for the ride, but when I'm thinking about what I want to see, I just want to see Al Chen. And don't we all just want to see Al Chen? Like, I know I do.
He really is great. Yeah.
And definitely check out Al's column. So what we're doing here is we're starting to play with the pieces that we're interested in. So you can decide to take an action on this information that you're pulling, but you can also decide to just drill down to see one aspect. And this is something, this dot column is another pattern I see all the time, where here's a project that I have and I just want to see who the project manager of it is. Or here's a purchase that was made and I just want to see the price. So it's allowing you to drill down into a section of that information based on the question you want to answer. So Justin, when you're noticing folks starting to move into this type of usage of the filter formula, are there any other stumpers or potential pitfalls that can get folks in trouble here?
Yeah, like you said, Maria, the and the or will become even more important. Just remember that, the and is more specific than the or. So like say, I'm having trouble thinking of a good analogy, but you'll see later on that the and is more exclusive and the or is more inclusive. We'll get more, that'll make more sense down the line.
Yeah, it's kind of like if I wanted apples or bananas, I'd get more fruit. But if I want apples that are Granny Smith, there's going to be less fruit available for me because I'm being more targeted on my request. Yeah, cool. Now I want some fruit. All right, so now let's take a look at exercise number 4. Also, just a reminder, folks, you can always ask questions about anything Coda related in these sessions. We're here for you there. So here we go. Exercise number 4 asks us to find the number of blog posts that either have the category launch or the category of puzzles. So this is kind of what we were talking about in that previous exercise, the difference between and or. Here, it seems like we have a wider request. right? We're looking for, I just want to see a little bit about what's been happening in both of these
Hmm.
spaces. It doesn't matter how those two are connected with each other. The other
That's right.
clue that I want to draw people's attention to is that we're looking for a number, which means if we think about the last step in our formula, it's going to be something like count. So, Justin, when you're looking at this particular exercise, anything that folks should be aware of as they're starting to approach it? I'm going to pull up the answer here so we can take a look at it.
No, I'm hoping this is actually kind of a break in the exercise
Mm,
here for folks. It should be just like three. So hopefully, like
yeah.
right away, you're kind of like, I know what to do here.
Hmm.
That's the goal. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and notice this looks very similar to what we just saw in exercise number 3. The only differences are instead of using and, we're using or, and instead of saying show me, Al Chen's face, we're looking for the count. So here, when you're thinking about formulas, always think about what is the question you want to answer. And that's going to let you know which of these pieces to put together. If you're looking for a number, that last step in your formula is going to be things like count, average, sum, some kind of math inserted here. And if you're looking for more information about that, you're going to be pulling one of the columns using a dot author like we saw with Al. And then noticing that what your request is, like how strict are you? If you're really strict, you're going to use things like and. If you're not so strict, you're going to use things like or. Nice. Anything else on this formula, Justin, that folks should be thinking about? Potential pitfalls, areas where they could go astray?
No, one thing to point out here is I
Hmm.
mentioned earlier the difference between a row and text.
Yeah.
And the one easy way to know if it's a row is you have this little symbol. It's like we call it a chip, but it
Hmm.
has that little row symbol in there. So the
Hmm.
interesting thing in this one is um, that both launch is a row from the other table, and you know it's from the
Yeah.
other table because it's a different color.
Hmm. Yeah, and the
Yeah.
reading like the color coding of formulas as well as the iconography is a really helpful skill. Oh, great! I'm so glad that you're enjoying it, Joe. And yes, our recording it's actually going to be right on our Crowdcast channel using this same link that you used to join today. So you'll get it moments after we are finished. Of course, Joe. Have a great meeting. So the color coding here in the iconography, I like to think about it kind of like hieroglyphics, right? Like if you're looking at hieroglyphics, you're like, whoa, that's so amazing. But if you know like the language, all of a sudden you get the meaning from it. So let's take a little Egyptology break here. Will you, Ramses the second, with me, Justin?
Absolutely.
Perfect. So the first thing I want to note is look at the little icons that are next to each of these little chips. This one next to blog post looks kind of like a table. You know why? Because it's a table. And then, like Justin said, we have these little rows here. That little icon lets you know you're dealing with a rows information, which lets you know that there's more detail you could mine from it, right? Like launch could also be something in Al's column. He could have been the author of it.
Mhm.
But then the color coding is also really valuable, particularly if you ever need to be in a point where you need to troubleshoot something, because we're going to make everything that's part of the same table be the same color. But if something's coming from another table, it's going to be a different color. So in this case, that's why launch and puzzles are that different color because they're coming from that table that we're looking up from. So let's actually jump back over to data land so we can see what this looks like. So here
Yeah,
we
this can be
go.
kind of confusing. So
Yeah.
this is good that we're looking at it.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Maria.
No, no problem. Anytime, Justin. Always interrupt me. Please do. I have no problems at all. You'll save me every time. So here, notice the categories table, puzzles, launch. Those were the two that were pink because they're living in this little area. And then the blog post down here is separate. And even though we're pulling information from that table, like we saw at the beginning of the time, that's it still resides somewhere else. So kind of think about this like citizenship, right? I am a citizen of the categories table, so my passport is pink. But if I'm a citizen of the blog post table, my passport is going to be green. Now I can travel between both of those areas, but my passport is always going to be the same color. So glad you're enjoying it, Karina. Excellent. Anything else on data types that you think is important for folks to know, Justin, with this particular formula?
Yeah, let's just while we're on it, let's scroll back down to the blog posts.
Totally.
This is actually another secret sauce for building some amazing things in Coda. The lookup
Delicious.
category or the lookup column.
Mm.
Um, it's amazing because each of the options in that dropdown is a row from another table. That is key to
Mhm.
understanding this formula. And that's
Yes.
why it shows up as a row chip in the formula, because even though it's a column in this table, it is actually also a row in another table. And you
Mhm.
can actually, when you hover over it, you can see details about that particular row. We're going to use that
Yeah.
in the next formula. So remember that you can actually access items from the other table through the lookup column itself. It's
Mhm.
like a portal to the other table.
Love it. Because remember, a row is a unit, right? You can't split it apart. It's always going to pull along that extra information. Nice. Let's go and take a look at the next exercise. All right. So we are on exercise number 5. So let's just scroll on down. So here we go. The request is find the number of blog posts where the description has the word Coda somewhere in it and has a category whose row in the categories table is selected. So there's a lot more criteria that we have going on here, but I want to draw everybody's attention to the key elements. We're looking for a number, so that lets us know how we're going to end that formula with a count in this case. And then everything else here is just that further criteria. We're looking for an area where Coda is mentioned, and we're also interested in that category that is selected. So we know that we're dealing with an and somewhere inside of that filter parentheses. Justin, looking at this, anything else that people should be tuning into or noticing before we open up the formula based on this request?
Yeah, yep. Just remember how that lookup column works and how you can access
Mm,
things from the other table through that column. So
yeah.
this one is a little trickier. It may take a few rounds when you're doing it on your own to get this,
Mhm.
but um, I think once you understand that relationship with lookup columns, it will help.
Mhm. Also, just so everybody knows, when you're working in this document by yourself, you can mark things where you understand it and don't quite get it. And that's going to give you your little progress area so you can know where to spend more time, also get some further resources. And because of Coda, you can just type equals anywhere in your document to be able to practice. And we've included some hints as well. So let's take a look at the anatomy of this formula. So, first of all, everybody notice the colors here. We've got one that's got citizenship from another place. It's that row from somewhere else. And then we've got a couple that are all part of the same table. So, Justin, do you want to walk us through what we're looking at here?
Sure. Yeah, let's start at the beginning with the table we want information from, which
Hmm.
we're looking for the number of blog posts. So we'll start with the blog post table.
Hmm.
And then of
Just
course our
like
favorite.
before. Yeah. Hmm.
Exactly. And our favorite formula at this point, dot filter. It brings a
Ooh,
smile to my face.
I know. It's like a good friend, you know? Hmm.
It is. Uh, so then we just take what the sentence is telling us and start building that into a formula. So
Hmm.
the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use the find formula. This is the first time we've used this in this
Yeah.
exercise. This one is a nice formula um, to find words within a sentence. So since the
Hmm.
description is a sentence, and we want to find the word coda within that sentence, we use the find formula. The way that we actually, if you look up at the top where we describe this formula, there's two
Hmm.
inputs. One is the needle, and the other is the haystack. And
Hmm.
so what we've done here is we've said description is the haystack, and then
Hmm.
we do dot find, and then what's the needle? It's coda. We're finding that
Hmm.
within the haystack.
And then this
Now, what
this number here. Let's walk through that.
Yeah, now this isn't as intuitive, I think, as other formulas.
Hmm.
So what the find formula actually does is gives you the number of characters where the word coda starts in the sentence.
Hmm.
So what we're saying by greater than zero is it found it, because if it doesn't find it, it returns zero. And if it does find it somewhere, it'll say it is the 22nd letter in this sentence. So
Uh-huh.
we're looking for things, for descriptions that have the coda in the description.
Mhm.
Maybe let's pause there and see, does that make sense to folks using the find formula?
And we actually have a question here from Karina, which isn't the needle and haystack within the dot find?
Ah, great question.
Mhm.
Karina, that is a fantastic question. I wrote this using the dot, but you could actually write it like we have in the example above. So
Mhm.
that can be confusing because you're like, wait, there's two ways to write this formula. And the answer is yes. You can either do
Mhm.
haystack dot find and then needle in the parentheses, or you can do find parentheses needle comma haystack. Um, whichever way you prefer is the way that you can do it. I like to do the dots instead of putting everything inside the parentheses, but totally up to you.
Mhm. And you'll find that you develop kind of your dialect, if you will, for formulas based on kind of what makes sense to your brain. And the nice thing is that since a lot of them are transferable, you can be adjusting the order in some cases, not all the time, but really you'll find that your way to make sense. And I'm with Justin on this one. I like this because it reads a little bit more like a natural language sentence, and so it's
Mhm.
easier for me to parse what's going on here. Mhm.
Yeah,
And
Excel formulas are built with everything inside the parentheses, and Coda
Mhm.
formulas, you have the option.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Justin, we have another request to just go through the greater than zero one more time. If we could just get
Yep.
another definition, just because it is a little bit different. What we're doing is we're taking something that's kind of numerical and making it about information. So go for it, Justin.
Yep. Yeah, this is best explained, I think, if we just actually get into the nitty gritty in the table. So maybe let's jump back to the table. The find formula says, let's go into this sentence and look one by one along the letters until you find the word coda. If you do find the word coda, then it gives you the number of characters at which point you found it. If it doesn't find it, it returns zero. So, for example, this is a perfect example here. So we would the formula find would do exactly what about to do right now, which is let's start at the
Mhm.
R there is one, the E
One,
is two,
two,
the C is
three,
three,
4, 5,
4,
6,
5, space
7,
counts as one,
8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. It's 14. I got 14. Did you get 14 too, Justin?
14. Yep. So if we did that same
Mhm.
formula on this column, it would return 14. If it didn't
Mhm.
find the word coda, it would just return zero.
Hold on, I'm just answering a question here. Yeah, anyone can come back and revisit this just by coming to the exact same link. Yeah, great question. For
Enjoy your
sure.
meeting, Alex.
Yes, I hope it is a lovely meeting with some kind of snack or coffee that you can provide yourself, since we're all probably working from home. Oh, thanks, Alec. You rock too. So the greater than zero, and Justin, let me know if I'm sort of absorbing this correctly. It's just like, is Coda somewhere? I don't care how many times it's mentioned, but is
Mhm.
it somewhere? As long as it's not zero, meaning Coda's not mentioned, I want to know about it. That's probably a good
That's
way to
right.
translate it.
That's
Nice,
exactly
cool.
right.
So it's kind of
Yeah, that was
like
a
a
tricky
true
one.
false, right? Like a one versus a zero, like false
Exactly.
versus true. hmm We're just doing it a slightly different way based on the find formulas criteria. Nice. Awesome. Karina's got it. Fabulous. Great. Mhm. Good question. Is it necessary though? Will it find it regardless? So, because the find formula is at its core, let's actually just open that up again so we can see it. Find, it's not necessarily like a search, right? What it is doing is find is directly connected to finding where the exact location that is mentioned. So you always want to have that greater than zero because that's just letting you know that's a way of saying it's somewhere inside of that. Yeah, Justin, that's correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and
this is
Karina,
like the
this
phrase
is a
to
tricky
remember
one.
here. Mhm. Yeah.
Yep, that's right.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Awesome. So let's take a look at
A good
X.
trainer always throws in some curveballs.
Indeed, indeed. And I think it's helpful to know because there's certain things where, like I don't logically think anymore like, oh, and then I have to say greater than zero because I'm looking for it anywhere. I just know that when I'm doing find, I always just add that greater than zero. It just becomes like part of that word. It's kind of like
Yep,
making a contraction, right? Instead of saying you all, I'm saying y'all.
that's right.
Um, we got a question here from Danny. Does it output the first occurrence of the search value for find?
Yes, that's
Mhm,
right, Danny. It does. Yes,
mhm. And in
the
this
first
case,
time.
because since we're looking for in exercise number 5, we're looking for blog posts where the description has the word coda somewhere in it. The order doesn't really matter. We just want to know, is coda there? Great, then let me know about it. Yeah. Mhm.
Oh, and
All
there's
right.
one more in
Yeah,
exercise 5. One more thing I
oh,
wanted to point out here
for
at the
sure.
end. So that was the first curveball. There's actually two curveballs in this formula. I know, devious. So the next piece is what we talked about earlier. So we're saying we want to know, in addition to is Coda in the description, is the category for that blog post selected in the categories table?
Mhm.
So we use the dot to go pull information from that categories row and put it into our formula.
Yeah. So notice in this case, we've got two units. We've got the description and find coda, and category is it selected. So you can combine these units however you want.
Yep.
Beautiful.
And Maria, maybe let's just go back to the data again. We
For
have to
sure.
jump back and forth.
Hmm.
When I build
Yeah,
formulas, by the way, I'm always jumping back and forth between the data and my
totally.
formula. But again, we're pulling information here from the categories table. So that selected column, um, this is pretty magical here. We are actually saying, show me blog posts that have a category that is selected in the categories table. So we're
Yeah.
going through like a portal. We're going through that category row, uh,
Hmm.
or excuse me, the column on the blog post, and then pulling out something from that table.
Also, Danny's saying he normally works in two windows. I'm the same. Sometimes I'll have just in two areas. Or if I'm going to be drafting a formula, sometimes I'll like do the formula on the same page as my data
Mm-hmm.
just so I don't have to go back and forth. And then once I'm happy with what I've got, I'll just pop it into where I need it to be. Yeah. Mhm. Excellent. Cool. All right. So let's take a look at exercise number 6. So here we go. Exercise number 6, our heart rate is up. We are in prime formula calorie burning mode. So what we want to do now is find the number of blog posts. So this tells us we're dealing with count again, our good old friend, the count of blog posts that are featured or meet both of the following conditions. Has type A and the product is a category. So here, just like we saw in exercise 6, where we had those two criteria that had kind of multiple parts to them, the same thing is happening here, right? We want to know, are you featured? Or if you're not featured, are you cool enough to be part of these two areas? So we know that and or are both going to be part of this particular formula. So Justin, any words of wisdom looking at this particular request here?
Yeah, on this one, we're gonna harken back to our days in learning math and algebra. And
Yes.
do you remember back in those days when you're doing order of operations, you use
Mhm.
parentheses to separate uh, functions in math. So what we can do here is actually use parentheses to separate these different conditions. And hopefully that doesn't trigger bad memories of math class in
Oh,
elementary school, but it's actually a lot easier than I made it sound. So let's jump into it.
I know. I
I think
had a
we know that
very
one.
strong memory of Mrs. Lucas, sixth grade algebra. Ooh, we were not simpatico. So I'm gonna right click here and hopefully we can all get through our math trauma together. So let's just first notice the beginning and the end of this formula are the same as what we've seen previously, right? The blog posts and then the count. Those are very similar. The only thing that's changing is what's inside the guts of our filter. So notice we've got some parentheses here. We've got the first part of our sentence. Is it featured? And we know if it's not featured, it has to be super cool to meet our criteria by being a certain type and also a category. So that's why we have that section in parentheses, because we're comparing featured versus this other criteria that has two different elements. I love it. Danny's like, numbers are fun. It's just when they get replaced by letters and put it in equations that becomes less fun. I love that.
Yeah,
I actually remember
couldn't
being
agree.
like, what is why? Why can't we just say what we're looking for? Ugh. Sixth grade me was not not into it. So let's walk through what we're seeing here, Justin. So can you take us through what's going on? We also have multiple colors here, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, yeah, we have three different colors.
Hmm.
Yeah, let's walk through this. So the
Yeah.
first part is filter, like we had come to know and love.
Hmm.
Now, one trick here is if you click next to the parentheses that opens the filter,
Uh-huh.
it will highlight that parentheses. And actually, if you move your cursor
Ooh.
just a little bit, yeah, there you go. It highlights where the end of that filter formula ends. So when you start
Mm.
getting lots of these parentheses stacked together, and you're like, I have no idea which parentheses I'm on and what we're dealing
Where
with,
am I?
just put
Mm-hmm.
yeah, just put your click next to it and you'll see the beginning and the end.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Cool.
first thing to note. So uh, the first criteria is featured equal to true, or does that feature checkbox checked on the blog post column?
Mm-hmm.
That one's pretty
Yeah.
easy.
Done.
Then we have an or plus an and. Now this is
Mm-hmm.
kind of when you start thinking about this, it starts to get a little bit crazy in your mind. But what we want to do is be very specific with the formula and say, here's exactly what I mean. So I'm going to use
Mm-hmm.
parentheses to
Yes.
separate them out. So what we want to know is featured equal to true, or a set of things must be true, and we
Mm-hmm.
want one or the other. It doesn't matter. We want both of
Yep.
them. Um, the first thing is easy, featured equals true. The second piece is either the type contains type A, or and the category equals product. So those two
Mm-hmm.
are like you want to glue those two together, the ands.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, another thing to notice is we use contains that formula.
Mm-hmm.
This goes back to what we first talked about when we looked at the data the very first time. The reason why we use
Mm-hmm.
type contains type A rather than equals is because you can actually have multiple options in that column.
Yeah. I'm going to jump back over to the data so we can see exactly what we're looking at.
Yeah. So if you used equals, you would only get the ones where just one was selected. But what we actually want is A in any of them. So if you
Mm-hmm.
used equals, you would only get that second row, not the first one. And
Right.
what we're saying is it just needs to be in there. It doesn't matter what else is in there with it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So it's kind of like if I think about food again, right? I want a fruit salad that contains grapes. If I want a fruit salad that equals grapes, I would just get a bunch of grapes. I wouldn't also
Yeah.
get pineapple, berries, and things like that. So contains is having that connection there. Good question. What's different between filter and contains? Could you filter to type A? So you could filter to type A, but you would want to still use contains because this is a multi-select. So contains is, hey, there might be multiple criteria. There might be multiple labels here. You could be multiple types. So I just want to make sure that if type A is somewhere inside of what's in your row, then I want to show it to you. Yeah. Anything else on that, Justin, that you think is helpful for
Yeah.
Karina's question around the difference between filters, contains, how they connect, how they don't connect?
Yeah. So the filter I think you're asking specifically between filter and contains. Filter
Hmm.
is take a set of things and trim them down.
Hmm.
Contains is this thing inside of this list somewhere? Are the
Yes.
grapes inside of the fruit salad anywhere?
Hmm.
Yeah, love that analogy.
Food, it always helps me understand things. What can I say? Good. I'm glad that makes sense, Karina. Nice. Yeah, so contains is just a way of asking more clearly for what you're looking for based on those criteria.
Yeah,
So then,
it's sisters with the equal sign, so it's very
yes.
related to equals.
Hmm. Yeah, they go to the same family reunion. But in this case,
Yeah,
equals is more restrictive, right? I only
correct.
want to know if you just have type A. Equals is single select. That's correct, Karina. Yes, exactly. Equals is single select, which is why we can use it for things like equals product, because that is a single select list, whereas type A
Mhm.
is a multi-select list, so we want to use contains. And this is just a good thing to know, like when you're troubleshooting your own work, if you get a result that doesn't seem right, double check. Am I doing equals? Am I doing contains? Where does that fit? It might be an area to kind of explore. So then, Justin, do you want to talk through why we have three different colors here?
Yeah, for sure. So uh, the green is everything that's from the blog post table.
Mm-hmm.
The orange is actually from the categories table. It used to be pink. What Coda does is it just takes green is always the first, pink is
Yep.
always the second, etc.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, we referenced a third table, which is the type table. That was at the
Oh,
very top, that really small table with only
yeah.
two rows.
Let's go take a look at
And
it.
that's why that is a third color. So that's the first time we've used that in any of these formulas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, that is your passport color. That's your citizenship, and type is up here, even though we're pulling it and letting it travel over to this table. Nice. All right, so are we ready for the piece de resistance? Exercise number 7, the bonus question? I think
Before we
so.
jump into the bonus, I just want to
Yeah.
say, if you just take a step back and look at that formula, like before we started today, and you saw that in your doc, it would be very intimidating. And I just
Hmm.
want to like congratulate everybody for like, getting through this, and now you
Yeah.
can look at this and understand what's going on. That is a huge accomplishment. That is really cool.
Yeah, you can also impress your friends by writing something like this and being like, yeah, turns out I'm real good at math. What's up? Danny has a good question here, which is what if you have the same name of a column in different databases? Ooh, yes. So, one thing I'll say, and Justin, I definitely want to hear from you on this is why it's really helpful to be conscious of your naming. If you've got a table called projects and a column called projects and something else, it can get kind of confusing. But this is why the color coding is so important. Is if you note if you're pulling something from another database, you want to make sure it's a different color here. But Justin, do you have any words of wisdom for Danny on kind of this dealing with your data in that way?
Yeah, I think that, like you said, the colors is your best friend here,
Hmm.
and just be aware of it, and notice that, like, hey,
Hmm.
I have a table name projects. Maybe I shouldn't.
Yeah. Oh, Justin, you froze for a second. Oh my goodness. Well, while Justin unfreezes, we'll go ahead and do there. But yeah, Danny, this is why you'll just want to double check your color coding and potentially rename based on what you're looking for. Hmm. Yeah, if it's a date column, you can have it be called due date or date, but that would just be an opportunity to make sure, like, oh, if I'm pulling this date from somewhere else, I just need to make sure it's another color in my formula. And if it's not, or if I'm getting an error, then what am I going to do there? Mhm. Oh, also, Danny, I just noticed your question here, which is you understand Excel formulas and and use Notion formulas quite extensively. Do we think that logic will transfer over to Coda quite well? Yes. So I think this is kind of like learning a language, right? If you've already learned a formula language, it's going to be a lot easier to learn another language too. But Excel and Coda do have some things in common, as well as Notion and Coda. I think the big differences with Coda formulas are it's about that chaining. So instead of doing a lot of wrapping of parentheses, it's very much start with the table, drill into the part of the table you're looking for, and then what do you want to do? So it should transfer quite well. Yeah, great question, Danny. All right, it looks like we have potentially lost Justin, but I think he's going to be coming back. Yeah, brackets are not fun sometimes. I totally get it. Yeah. Hmm. All right, so while we wait for Justin to return from the bowels of the internet, let's go ahead and take a look at the final bonus question here. So we've got a lot of things going on. And what we want to do first is return a bulleted list of blog posts. So that lets us know the end. So instead of using count, we're going to use that bulleted list formula that we saw at the beginning. And we're looking for blog posts that either, so this tells us there's going to be an or at play, right? Because we want this or that. And the first criteria is if the category description is less than 100 characters or has a type B in the type column. So this is contains again. And either is authored by TJ Ebby or the published date is 2017. So there's a lot of things going on here, but we can put these sequentially by just relying on our approach. So I'm going to go ahead and just re-invite Justin. He should be back in just a moment. Great. So let's take a look at the formula that's going on here. The answer. So if we right click on it, notice there's a lot going on here, but this is just a list of things that we care about. So the beginning is the same, blog posts, and the end, instead of count, we're just doing bulleted list. But now we're just seeing the insides. So let's use Justin's tip of finding those parentheses. So this is the first criteria. The description has a length of less than 100, or the type contains type B. So this is very similar to what we just saw, right? The type contains, in this case, we're using type B instead of type A. And then description, this is kind of like when we chose find to find Coda, but in this case, we're just using length is less than 100. So that's the first criteria. The second criteria is and, because we also want to have this. Is the author equal to TJ or the date published of this year is 2017? So here, what we're seeing is just like we saw with Al Chen, we can use equals because we're looking for one criteria. Or, and then in this case, we're just saying, hey, the year is 2017. So we're just kind of pulling in. Now, then what we're doing is we're having this nice little bit here of sort. So we're having this sort the information into a bulleted list right here. Oh, good question. When you are creating long formulas, does the area have a scroll bar to help navigate? Yes. You can also actually put these on different lines if you want to do that too. Mhm. So here, even though we're using this formula language, I want to just draw everyone's attention to the fact that we're really just looking at a list of criteria. So the first criteria being that description length and it contains type B, the second one being the author and the year, and then we're just sorting it by doc title into a bulleted list. So again, like Justin said, at the beginning of this time, you probably would have been like, oh, what am I even looking at? But now reminding yourself that the things you want to look up to help translate a formula are the beginning and the end. And then in the middle, using things like the parentheses and the colors and things like and or to link your criteria together. So it's kind of like we took some Spanish and we translated it into Italian. The Spanish being what we saw here in our text, and then the Italian being what we're seeing here in the formula. Great question, Karina. What is this true part of the sort? So what we want to do, what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, if my criteria up here is true, I want to sort it by doc title. So we're kind of taking, did it meet that criteria? If so, I want to sort it. So if we go and click on sort, we can come up here and see, let me just make my window a little bit bigger for you here. We can see up at the top that this sort, the parameters are we always want to have it start with true. And then say, what are we looking for? So that's just part of kind of the syntax of that formula. And remind yourself that you can always click on any of these little chunks to get more information about what they are about. So you can always get more detail there. Yeah. All right. Excellent. So I'm going to just stop sharing my screen here. I'm sorry that we've lost Justin, everybody. It looks like the internet's just not being our friend here today. Or Justin, maybe you can just, oh, it looks like you are here. So if you want to unmute or turn your camera on, that'd be great. Yeah, no problem. Gosh, it looks like the power went out. I know we in this new working from home option, there's always going to be something, but totally fine. So, a few words of wisdom. We've given you a whirlwind tour of kind of how to think about the filter formula. I encourage all of you make a copy of that doc, practice writing your own, and then comparing it to the answers that we've included. We also have hints in there. And then if you've got questions, feel free to get in touch with us. We are more than happy to help. So what I'd like to do in our last moments here together is Justin and I are wanting to do more of these. So I would love to know what formula essences would you like to learn more about? Go ahead, just post a chat for me. I'd love to just know kind of what you're looking for so that we can kind of schedule and think this through. So if you've got some formulas you'd like to learn more about, go ahead, post a chat. Otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your weekend, a great day. It's been an absolute pleasure playing with you. Thank you, Justin, for nerding out with us, for sharing your insights and your ideas. It's been absolutely fun, and I always love when we get to spend some time together. Nice. Automation triggers. Love it, Karina. Beautiful. Gotcha. Formula map. Nice, Robin. Beautiful. Yeah. Cool. And also, remember, you can re-watch this just by coming to the exact same link. So if you want to go through it again, watch it again, you can always do that. It's also going to be posted to our YouTube channel too. Button formulas. Nice, Karina. Yeah. Oh, cool. Paul, knowing more about contains might help. Yes. One of the things that we've thought about is doing a thing about the differences between contains, matches, and in, because they do kind of get at something slightly different. Yeah. Thanks, Paul. Beautiful. All right. Great. Well, have a wonderful rest of your week, everybody. We'll be in touch. Enjoy, play, and if you ever have questions, you know where to find us. There is an entire company ready and waiting to support you. All right, everybody, enjoy your weekend. I'll see you next time.